Hey, seventh grade, we're starting on chapter 19, and the Harpies have descended on the Trottles. They've pinned Mrs. Trottle, they've pinned Mr. Trottle, and now they're capturing Raymond. Chapter 19. By the evening of the 9th day, the rescuers could put off their return no longer, but as they made their way to King's Cross Station, they felt sadder than they had ever felt in their lives. To come back in disgrace like this, to know that they had failed. Odge, trudging along with the mistmaker's suitcase, was silent and pale, and this worried the others. They expected her to rant and rave and stamp her feet when Ben once more refused to come with them, but she behaved well, and that wasn't like her. If Odge was going to be ill, that would really be the end. They had waited to the last minute to make sure Ben had completely recovered from the blow to his head. He kept telling them that he was fine. He helped them to clear the summer house, sweeping and tidying with a will that made the parting worse because they remembered the moment when they first saw him in the basement of Trottle Towers. How happy they'd been when they thought he was the prince. How certain that they could bring him back. But there'd been no changing Ben's mind. He wouldn't leave his grandmother. "She's having an operation," he said. "I can't leave her to face that alone. Maybe I can come down next time, when the gump opens again." He turned away then, and they knew how much he minded, but Odge hadn't lost her temper the way she'd done before. She just shrugged and said nothing at all. The ghosts were waiting on platform 13. They looked thoroughly shaken, though it was hours since the Harpies had come through on their way to rescuing Raymond. "I'll tell you, it was like the armies of the dead," said Ernie. "I wouldn't be Raymond Trottle for all the rice in China. They've had engineers here all afternoon looking for blocked drains." And indeed the Harpies' vile stench still lingered. Even the spiders on the stopped clock looked stunned. Now it was time to say goodbye, and that was hard. The ghosts and the rescuers had become very fond of each other in the 9 days that they had worked together. But when Cor asked them if they wouldn't come through the gump, they shook their heads. "Ghosts is ghosts, and islanders is islanders," said Ernie. "And what would happen to the gump if we weren't here to guard it?" But the ogre was looking anxiously at the station roof. "I think we go now?" he said. "I wish not to be under the smelling ladies when they return." And no one wanted that. No one, for that matter, wanted to see the prince brought back in the Harpy's claws like a dead mouse. They went through the cloakroom and shook hands. Even the ghost of the train spotter was upset to see them go. "Please, could you take the mistmaker's suitcase for me?" Odge suddenly. "My arm is getting tired." Gertie nodded, and Odge went forward to the opening. "I'll go ahead," she said. "I'm missing my sisters, and I want to get there quickly." It says a lot about how weary and sad the rescuers were that they believed her. When he came into the ward, Ben saw that the curtains were drawn around Nanny's bed. "Has she had the operation?" he asked the nurse. It was Celeste, the one with the red rose in her cap, whom everyone loved. "No, dear, she's not going to have the operation. She's very ill, Ben. You can sit with her quietly. She'd like to have you there, but she may not say much." Ben drew aside the curtain. He could see at once that something had happened to Nanny. Her face was tiny. She looked as though she didn't really belong there anymore. But when he pulled a chair up beside the bed and reached for her hand, the skinny, brown-flecked fingers closed tightly around his own. "Foiled him," said Nanny, with a surprisingly clear voice. "About the operation, you mean?" "That's right. Going up here full of tubes. Told them my time was up." Her eyes shut and then fluttered open once again. "The letter. Take it," she whispered. "Go on now." Ben turned his head and saw a white envelope with his name on it lying in her locker. "All right, Nanny." She watched him, never taking her eyes away as he took it and put it carefully in his pocket. And now she could let go. "You're a good boy. We shouldn't have—" And her voice drifted away. Her breathing became shallow and uneven. Only her hands still held tightly onto Ben's. "Just sleep, Nanny," he said. "I'll stay." And he did. as the clock ticked away the hours. That was what he had to do now. Sit beside her, not thinking of anything else, not letting his mind follow Oj and the others as they made their way home, not feeling sorry for himself because the people he loved so much had gone away. Just being there while Nanny needed him. That was his job. The night nurse, coming in twice, found him still as stone beside the bed. The third time she came in, he had fallen asleep in his chair, but he had still held his grandmother's cold hand inside of his own. Gently, she uncurled his fingers and told him what had happened. It was hard to understand that he was now absolutely alone. People dying, however much you expect it, is not like you think it will be. The sister had taken him to her room, she'd given him tea and biscuits, and now, to his surprise, she said, "I've been in touch with the people who are going to fetch you, and they're on their way. Soon you'll be in your new home." Ben lifted his head. "What?" he asked stupidly. "Mrs. Trottle has made arrangements for you, Ben. She's found a really nice place for you, she says, a school where you'll learn lots of things. She didn't think you'd want to go on living with the other servants now that your grandmother is dead." Ben was incredibly tired. It was difficult to take anything in. "I don't know anything about this," he said. The sister patted his shoulder. Mrs. Trottle had sounded so kind and concerned on the telephone that it never occurred to her to be suspicious. "Ah, here they are now," she said, and two men came into the room. They wore natty suits, one pinstriped and one pale gray, and skipper ties. One of them had long dark hair parted in the middle and trained over his ears. The other was fair with thick curls. Both of them smelled strongly of aftershave, but their fingernails were dirty. Ben disliked them at once. They looked oily and untrustworthy, and he took a step backward. "I don't want to go with you," Ben said. "I want to find out what this is all about." "Come on now, we don't want to fuss," said the dark-haired man. "My name's Stanford, by the way, and this here is Ralph. We've got a long drive ahead of us, so let's be off sharpish." "Where to? Where are we going?" "The name wouldn't mean anything to you," said Ralph, putting a comb through his curls. "But you'll be all right there, you'll see. Now say goodbye to the sister and we'll be on our way." The sister looked troubled. The men were not what she had expected, but her orders were clear. Ben must not leave the hospital alone and in a state of shock. "I'm sure everything will be all right, dear," she said. "And of course you'll come back for your granny's funeral." The men caught each other's eye, and Ralph gave a snigger. One thing the children at Ramsden Hall did not get was time off to go to funerals. But Ben was so tired now that nothing seemed real to him. If the sister thought it was all right, then perhaps it was. After all, what was there for him now in Trottle Towers? He picked up his jacket. The letter was still in his pocket, but he didn't want to read it in front of these unpleasant men. "All right," he said wearily, "I'm ready." And then, sandwiched between the two thugs Mrs. Trottle had hired to deliver him to as horrible a place as could be found in England, he walked down the long hospital corridor towards the entrance hall. It was very late. As she trudged through the streets, Oj was dazzled by the headlights of cars and the silly advertisements flashing on and off. Advertisements for stomach pills, for hairspray, for every sort of rubbish. For a moment she wondered if she was going to be able to stand it. On the island now it would be cool and quiet. The mist makers would be lying close together on the beaches, and the stars would be bright and clear. It wasn't a very nice thought that she would never see the island under the stars again. Well, not for 9 years. But in 9 years, she might be as silly as her sisters, talking about men and marriage and all of that stuff. She stopped for a moment under a lamp to look at the map. First right, first left, over a main road, she'd be there. London wasn't very beautiful, but there were good things here and good people. The Plodger was kind, and Henry Pendergast, and even quite ordinary people, shop assistants and park keepers. It wouldn't be too bad living here, and she wouldn't miss her bossy sisters. Well, perhaps Fredegonda a little. Fredegonda could be quite funny when she was practicing squeezing people's stomachs to give them nightmares. The mistmakers she'd miss horribly, that was true, but she couldn't have kept him. The way those idiots had carried on in the Astor had shown her that. He was old enough now to fend for himself. When the others realized that she hadn't gone ahead, that she'd doubled back and hidden in the cloakroom, they'd see to him and explain to her parents. And even if she wanted to change her mind, it was too late. An hour from now, the gump would be closed. I'm a hag, she reminded herself, because rather a bad attack of homesickness was coming on. I'm Odge with the tooth. As she turned left, crossed the road, she could see the hospital now, towering over the other buildings. Ben would be in there still, and when she imagined him watching by the old woman's bed, Odge knew she had done the right thing. Ben was clever, but he was much too trusting. He needed someone who saw things as they really were. No one was going to get the better of Ben while she was around, and if it meant living in dirty London instead of the island, well, that was part of the job. Up the steps of the hospital now, even so late at night, there were lights burning in the big entrance hall. Hospitals never slept. And we'll stop here for today. So, we'll see what happens to Ben. We'll see what happens to Aj next time.